reason this, you got it, okay. The reason that this subject kind of interests me, the main thing we got into is that our team here in Denver took over the data compatibility, data compliance part of our databases, basically here in for Xero. Xero is a accounting platform, if you're not aware of what they are, and we handle basically data from all around the world, mostly Australia and New Zealand, which has their own compliance rules, but then also we have a lot of customers who are in the UK, and the UK obviously still follows the GDPR laws, maybe not to the extent that they used to, but they are still in that kind of purview. So keep that in mind. So let's get into it here a little bit. So quick, my bio, my name is Christopher Wolff. I've been working with databases since SQL 2000. Here's my Twitter, my email. I do a little blogging now, thanks to Steve Jones. He's pushing me to do that now. So I have a whole more detailed information about this presentation on my blog if you want to know more. Most of my presentations are in my GitHub repo, so if you want to look in there. And I am a senior DRE at Xero, and I am a Microsoft and AWS certified professional. So the objectives of this talk are, we're going to define what data compliance is. We're going to go in an overview of the legal issues and laws, and then we're going to talk about classifications of data, and then how to remove your data, or maybe you don't have to. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So data compliance, when we talk about data compliance, we're really talking about data retention. This is defined by the policies of persistent data and records management for meeting legal and business data archival requirements. Now, this has been expanded, obviously, recently with things like the GDPR laws and also the California laws as well, to do more than just retention. It has to do with being forgotten, basically. So it's a balancing act between legal and privacy concerns and economics and need to know concerns. So a lot of, obviously, companies want to know, will get audited, things like that by auditors from government, or maybe just through the SEC or something like that. So they're going to need to retain some of that information. But if a customer asks you to delete their data, it's different. You have to change that up a little bit. And there's different meanings depending on the industry. There's some industries that won't need to delete anything. You have to obfuscate, and then other ones where you just got to delete completely. So it's a balancing act, and I'll get in more into that a little bit later. So the legal issues. This falls under regulatory compliance. Laws, policies, and regulations that data compliance falls under, basically, can vary widely depending on the region of the world. There are many different laws in different areas of the world. Excuse me. Accrediting organizations are there also to help entities navigate through these regulatory items. If it's not something you want to figure out on your own, there are many different companies that would be happy to charge you money to make the things go away, as it were. So, but most of the time, most companies just have to figure out themselves. So the laws, there's a whole host of laws around the world. Like I said, the main one most entities use as kind of a standard is the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, known as GDPR. Lays down rules relating to protection of natural person with regards to the processing of personal data, and rules relating to free movement of said data. So only applies to citizens of the EU and member states, but let's say you have somebody who's doing business in your thing and they're from EU, but they're doing business in the United States, you still have to consider that they may be able to, you have to delete their data out of your United States only company, it's very possible that that's something you will have to do. There are many other location-based ones, that use this law as a framework. The California Consumer Privacy Act is another one. It's not exactly one for one, but it's pretty close, especially when it comes to forgetting people and things like that. So, has anybody have any questions so far or anything? Maybe one in the chat. Let's see. Oh, hi, Phil. No, that would not be in the chat then. Okay. All right, so 3 main points of GDPR, and we're going to focus on this because this is the big one, is consent, data minimization, and individual rights. Getting consent to collect personal data. Every time you go to a website, you see that little thing, checkbox on the very bottom that says, I agree to have my data collected. That's okay. This is part of that. That's why you see that on every website now, is because of the law, the rules in this law. If you want to blame somebody, as it were. So, you have to get consent before you do any data collection at all. If you're found to be malfeasant on that part, you can get into a lot of trouble when it comes to regulators and fining and things like that. So, data minimization, only keeping data having to do with a well-defined business objective. You're telling the customer up front, this is what we're keeping your data for. We're not going to do it for 5 other things that may come up later. We're only doing it for this. If you change your rights, you've seen like a million emails from customers from companies that say, we've changed our consent rules or something like that. And basically, and that's basically what it comes down to, is that data minimization part, is that they're going to find, is they're being very clear about what their business objective is in what you have. Otherwise, they may get, a slap on the wrist for that. And then individual rights. It gives clear rights to understand why their data is being collected and processed. This also has to do with like being the right to be forgotten, things like that. People can say, I don't want any of my data in your database anymore when it comes to my personal information. So more than likely, you just change a flag in there to be customer 1234. You don't know anything about them. You've changed their address, and it says add customer's address and things like that. So therefore, they are forgotten at that point. But a better way to do is basically just straight up delete it as well. But that all depends on the schema of your database, how it's working. Does that work for what you're trying to do? So classifications of data, most regulations cover what is called personal identifying information, or PII. You'll hear this term a lot when it comes to keeping your data in a steady path, things like that. Any representation of information that permits the identity of an individual to whom the information applies to be reasonably inferred. Basically, any way you could track it back to, my name is Chris Wolff, basically. Anything to do with it, like email address, social security number, tax ID, things like that, applies to any employee or customer of an entity as well. So if you have employees, you have to be aware that they may ask you one day, oh, I'm no longer your employee, delete my data. That's very possible. You could do that. They can ask for that as well. So keep that in mind. Examples of PII information, I kind of went over some of them, but name, first or last or both, government IDs, tax ID, other places they don't have security numbers. They usually have a tax ID in UK, things like that. Location data, the address, Google Maps info, longitude, latitude, that's still where you live or something like that. That's still personal information. Phone number, email address, and website URL. My blog is still attached to me, and they can come back to me, and so therefore, that's something we could get rid of and things like that. Twitter handles, things like that. So removing data. Once we get to the point where we want to remove data, you've got to identify where your data exists in your database. Most companies, if you've got, they don't have a ton of databases, you could probably narrow it down. Our company does a micro architecture setup. So we have probably around 300 to 400 databases. So, and each team owns their own database. So for me as a DRE, that's pretty much an impossible task for me to figure out. So what we do is we give them a way for them to identify their information themselves, and we have it in some kind of data store where we say this column is personal identification, this is not, and therefore if we have a deletion request from a customer, we then run some scripts, and then we are able to identify this these 3 columns in this database have information that needs to be removed. We then give the information to the team, and they take care of it. So good candidates also are customer or employee tables. Those are really easy to find, obviously. Order of information can hold location data or email information. Data outside the database. Do you have object stores like S3 or sorry, I'm blanking on what the Azure one is, but same thing. Like, are you keeping stuff outside the database, but it's still relevant, like tax information or something like that, like forms or invoices? Those need to be removed as well. So keep that in mind. And then they may contain, photos or information, and photos are still identifying information as well. So that needs to be removed as well. So,
hey, Chris.
Yeah.
So I have an example from a client. Do you mind?
Yeah, go for it, man.
So this client has their customers have hardware that they lease out, and the hardware has MAC addresses, and those are tracks. And obviously, you want to keep track of which device is in which household, for example. So that MAC address is PII, considered PII, and handled accordingly. But for analytics, they have to remove that data, so they do a one-way hash on the MAC address, right? So that anybody who gets a hold of the analytical information can't tie it back to an individual.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's something I'll cover a little bit more, is like rather than just removing. But that's great. That's a great example, Jeremy. So that's exactly what we want to see, is like, are you thinking outside the box? Doesn't necessarily mean you have to get rid of all the data. You could just keep it, but then you have to mask it or do something like what you say with a hash or something like that. That's definitely a possibility as well. So we do that with our users. The way our database works is the users cannot be removed from our schema, otherwise the whole database basically kind of doesn't work. So we just change the thing to remove user requested deletion on such and such date, and that's their name now. They don't have any other name. The email address goes the same way, and we just keep going with all the other PII information. So, does anybody have any other questions? Cool, bopping along here. So automating removal of data, like I told you before, you want some kind of repeatable process to delete data. If you have so many databases, it's really hard to just go in there manually and delete all that information. It's not going to help. What you need to do is you need to have some kind of script or some kind of process, to covers the tables and locations of the data that needs to be removed, and then possibly maybe some kind of API. So our developers have APIs over the top of their databases, to where, rather than going in and running a script manually, they just go in the API, and the API, first of all, can say it does a get and says, do we have all the data we're looking for? Is there any data when it comes to this org ID or this organization? So we get that information, and then what we do is if it comes back, it is notified to us as a team, and then we notify the development team and say, hey, you've got some personal information that needs to be removed. So then they'll take the deletion process. I think it's a put, I think is what it's called, and they'll run that against the API, and that'll remove all the data, rather than just to have, and it'll be a smooth process. You don't have to worry about, maybe the script won't work, or maybe the org's not there or something like that. It will run on its own kind of thing. So this process can also work like Jeremy was talking about, with things like having to do with like changing of the data, things like that. They could obfuscate it and mask it as well. That's a very big possibility as well. So, or not, like I said, backups, a couple things to consider. So backups, most regulators have given backups a pass. So if somebody asks you to delete their data, you do not have to restore all the backups you ever had. Take them out and take another backup. They understand that the data basically, they're satisfied with that being what's called beyond use, basically. And it's a reasonable expectation that you would never restore that data if you had to. Most companies like mine, who are an online accounting information, if we were to restore back even to like the last transaction log, which is 10 minutes, we would lose so much data of customers who already entered information in. So that's probably never going to happen. That's what it comes down to. So keep that in mind. Obviously your mileage may vary. If you have a system set up to where you can restore that possibly, then it may be something you have to talk to your regulators, find out if they're keen for it to be beyond use, or if they have some concerns, is what it basically comes down to. You got a legal counsel, maybe check with your legal counsel, those kinds of things. So, and then, like I said, breaking schemas. If a database requires the ID of the user to exist, alterations of the string data required, like I said. So, user request delete is what you change the name to, or something like that. And you could do the same with the email address. If it has to be an email, you could say user request delete at gmail.com, and it would be able to keep that reinforcement of the database, things like that. So, Todd, now's the time if you have any questions.
So you answered one of them, and that was with the regards to backups. So that's good to know. With regards to, maybe we'll get to this later, but when you have to obfuscate the data to restore it in like a different environment, like a UAT, QA, dev, whatever. I've seen in augmented reality and with virtual reality, what's happening now is that even if you anonymize the data, because the way that you physically move your body, whether you're typing or you're moving your head, I mean, everybody has like their own physical tics and quirks, and that data is now getting captured, and it can be tied back to that person, even if it's been completely anonymized. Stanford had a paper about this, and they're still trying to figure out, how does GDPR translate to telemetry of a person?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic for sure. So obviously that's not something we do at Xero, so we're not worried about like how you do your accounting. It wouldn't really relate back to you. But I could see that being an issue for sure. So, and it sounds like it's still something they're working out. And the most of the time you just work with the regulators. And the regulators usually most of the time are reasonable, and they want to come to a good agreement with you. So it's very possible those things could be changed in a way that would satisfy them. So, but good point. Thanks, Todd. All right. Well, you guys didn't ask enough questions. That's fine. So, so here's a full list of the laws around the world. Like I said, you can get this presentation on my GitHub. It has a huge amount of data, like all the HIPAA as well, and the PCI, all the laws you'd ever want to know, basically. If you want to bore yourself to death, the GDPR law in full is here. It is a lot of data, a lot of information. So the definition of PII, basically when it comes to the Department of Labor, this is kind of a general definition of that. And then information about backups, the right to erasure, things like that. This is a good article about how that works, things like that. And then related topics, regulatory compliance and data retention. Those are big ones. So here is my blog about the data retention we do here at Zero, but more in general, just about it, the information. So if you want to know more detail beyond my presentation, this is a good place to go. So it's got the same kind of links we got here. So does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have students helping you with these projects sometimes?
We do not, unfortunately. We just do it all ourselves. So this is a process that has been in. I want to say it's all nice and good, but we're always finding new stuff we have to figure out and delete. But this was done with a collaboration of our database team and our legal counsel, and they were able to hammer out all the things that they needed. So we have a good base at this point, but we need to. There's definitely always new stuff that comes up because people make new databases, they make new tables, and we're going to need to know if those are right or not. So good question though, Phil. So
I might just share something I just learned this week about PII. That surprised me, that like the age of a person isn't PII alone unless they're older than 89 years old. Then the age alone is enough to identify them enough.
because it narrows it down.
Because it narrows it down. Yeah, and I said that's really interesting.
Interesting. I did not know that one. That's a good one to know. So.
At least it was in the test I took. I don't know if it's a US only.
It all depends. Yeah, like I said, each law is different. It's like
Yeah.
snowflakes. They're all over the place. So it's very possible that you have new information.
That alert 35 years and control my phone.
Anybody else have any other questions? Cool. I think that's it. Yeah. So. All right. Well, that's it. If you guys have any other questions or concerns, I gotta stop sharing. Please let me know. My blog has all the information about me, and then you can also hit me up on Twitter anytime. So.
Yeah, good stuff, Chris. Appreciate it, man.
Yep. Round of applause.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in for sure. It took a long time for me.